Virtual Stratosphere, the podcast on all things technology agnostic. I'm Kyler Cheatham, Global Marketing Director here at Third Stage Consulting Group, and I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Kristy Barber, who is our small business specialist. And today we are going to dive into the inner workings of family business. So both technology and drama is on the menu for today. So Kristy, thank you so much for being here, first of all.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And so Kristy has a unique background, not only as our small business specialist, she's also a very accomplished entrepreneur and a fifth generation family business. Is that right?
No, I am fourth generation.
Fourth. Okay. Yeah. So she has lots of personal and professional experience in helping family run businesses to implement or understand their overall technology. So with that, Kristy, can you just give us a baseline definition of what a family business looks like? Because I assume it might come in all kind of shapes and sizes.
Yeah, there's some that are small, maybe it's just a handful, under 10 family members. You have other companies that are big, and they may have, 20, 30. I highly doubt you probably have a family business of more than 100, but you never know. Maybe there's really large companies out there. And I know there was one we worked with a couple years ago, and they were close to about 50 employees, and it was almost, I would say 99% family owned.
Wow, that's pretty incredible.
Pretty cool.
So what kind of dynamic does that look like from an overall alignment? As we know that executive alignment just in general is a key strategy to any successful digital transformation. So what does that look like from a family business perspective?
It's different because you have it's different levels of ownership. So it may be you're the past generation and you're the one that still holds the keys to the kingdom. I'm the one coming in and I have all these grand ideas with technology that's like, hey, I love the pen and paper we're using or some older software, but in order for us to get from A to B, we're going to need to put some more robust software in. And I think it's helping everybody within the company understand why there is a need for that, and not it coming as I know more than you do and you know less, or it isn't any of that. But I've seen those type of dynamics come in of like, I've been running this for 35 years. You've been here too. How can you think this is the best solution?
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. So when it comes to overall organizational design, like you just touched on, what are some of the best practices you've seen for family run businesses in making sure that they do have an effective organizational hierarchy or just overall roles and responsibilities?
A couple of different things that come to mind is one being, let's say when the next generation starts coming in, or even if you have different family members, maybe they've worked at a different job and they want to come in now. I think it's asking, are you ready to be a part of this business? Because it's going to look different than when you work for Joe Smo over here, 9 to 5. You punch the card and you do your thing. You want to be able to treat each member fairly, being that, hey, just because you have our last name doesn't mean that you get to come at the top and you start at $300,000 a year. Like, what is that going to look like? How do they work up the ranks just like everybody else? And how are you going to address underperforming family members? That can get tricky as well. It's Joey and we've talked to him but he's good and we don't want to talk about other things, and having a good plan in place for how you're going to mitigate those risks helps. So you're not having, fallout in different ways. You're not having toxicity built up in the workplace where more family leaves, or there's just different dynamics that come with that.
Yeah, certainly a very high vulnerability environment. As poor Joey just got an performance improvement plan, right? But you have to see him at Thanksgiving the next day. So that can be a little awkward, I assume.
It can. And I've had that experience before with family members, and then something said and you're like, cool, I'll see you tomorrow night for Christmas Eve dinner. Hopefully there's no bad blood.
Yeah. Yeah, being able to separate that, or to your point, have a plan around it. Maybe it is, outsourcing to a third party that would have a better idea of how to have that conversation, or an advisor such as yourself when it comes to an organizational change situation. I assume that could be pretty helpful to have that autonomy.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I know I have friends that do this, and you see them in companies that they hire industrial psychologists, and they come in and they help mitigate some of those problems that are going on, and help from an outside perspective. You as the family members, we at times get so honed in on, this is the most important thing right here, and we can't see all of this out here. And having somebody come in from a different set of eyes to say, hey, let's focus over here, or let's put together a different plan that helps everybody be, I don't know, just not more efficient is the right word, but creating more harmony within the organization.
Mhm. Yeah, I can only assume that is really difficult, in just having that emotional layer. For example, even from my dynamic of, I lead a team here at Third Stage and have those conversations and do that all the time, but I am truly unable to give our caregivers feedback or anything like that. So my husband has to step into that role just because it's way too emotional for me to be involved in. And I can only imagine from a family business dynamic, you have to have that awareness, especially as a leadership of like, hey, it's going to get weird sometimes.
Yeah, and to your point, if you show up too emotional about something, it causes secondary problems,
Hmm.
and you don't want that either.
Absolutely. Yeah. And for me, it's just talking about something so vulnerable as my children, right? I have no problem managing a team, but when it comes to something that's so near and dear to my heart, and I can imagine that that's kind of the same thing when it comes to just the lineage within small business, because you have done that for 30, 40 years, and you have built it a lot of times from the ground up. Um, we see a lot of like billionaires now not having any inheritance to their next generation, just because they want to instill those values of kind of
Mhm.
building something for yourself, which I assume can be tricky within the organizational design of family businesses too.
Oh yeah, and you can see too, maybe like a good example is, maybe we're at generation number 4,
Mhm.
and number 4 is like, hey, you know what, we want to sell this, we don't want to do this anymore, but we're not going to consult with gen 5
Mhm.
to see if they would even want to purchase it. And
Oh
having you
wow,
start
yeah.
having those types of conversations to be like, hey, we don't want this anymore, but we don't want to give you the opportunity to buy it because we want to get max price for it, and I know you couldn't afford that. And that gets sticky situations too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely. Well, I want to, after our break, dig into some technology pieces, and some more business process when it comes to family-owned businesses. But we're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back to Digital Stratosphere.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Welcome back to Digital Stratosphere, the podcast, all things technology agnostic and independent. I'm Kyler Cheatham, your host here, and I am joined by small business specialist Kristy Barber, and we were talking about different technologies and digital transformation when it comes to family businesses. So, Kristy, we started off the episode kind of talking about the different dynamics and challenges that can happen just from a human side. And I'm wondering from like a technology side, again, huge assumption on my part here, but we talk a lot about, especially in this podcast with our colleagues, tribal knowledge. And I can only assume that it's almost like a hyper issue in family-owned businesses, just because they have built that process and that's kind of what they've run. And so how do you help when you are integrating a new technology, knowing that you're going to have to capture a lot of that tribal knowledge to understand the true needs of the business?
It's tricky. and you see this even in non-family businesses too, is there's a lot of, I own this, I designed this, whether it's an Excel worksheet or it's some process, and being able to not hand it over, but share the inner workings of how it works with other people. It's almost like, oh, are you going to take this away, or do I get to keep this? How much are we going to modify it? Because I'm really comfortable with it. So when you look at it, you want to make sure they aren't losing so much ownership over it. You want to make sure that they still have the value, and you're seeing the value in what they're bringing. And that helps create this level of comfortability that they're being seen and they're being heard.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because on our sister podcast, this last episode, Eric interviewed Dr. Christina Serrano, who's a professor up at CSU. And she talked about how a lot of times change needs to be within a motivation for the individual. And I would imagine that it's very similar to the situation you're laying out, in the fact that there has to be an understanding and a motivation to want to grow the business, or, create more efficiencies, or whatever the goal is, in order to kind of capture that tribal knowledge in a really vulnerable and uncomfortable situation. It's a totally new process, especially if it's something that you built from scratch. There can be a lot of emotion and pride around that.
Yeah. And I see that right now. And a client I worked with a couple months ago, that there's one guy in there and he built this phenomenal piece of software from the ground up, and it works really well. And we're to the point where, hey, we may have to replace it because it can't do what we need to do to keep up. And being able to, let him down easy, and not just be like, well, this is not the right fit anymore, but saying why, like you said, creating that motivation behind why we need to change. And I think too, there's so much psychology in change that we've never realized, because before kind of this tech revolution, change didn't happen as frequently. And now change happens, sometimes it feels daily, but it happens a lot faster, and people, they can adapt to it, but they can't adapt to it. It's probably a whole separate conversation about that, but still.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of a technology revolution, we obviously just had the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still, very much a real thing for our global audience. So many small businesses, specifically family-owned businesses, really had to adjust to how they did business. And I'm wondering if you can kind of give us an example or talk us through how you helped with integrating new technologies in that dynamic that was just a real forced transformation.
The one that I think most people have gone to is e-commerce. If you had a brick and mortar store, you went e-commerce, and helping people take a Shopify account, integrate it in with the software they have. That's probably the biggest one that I saw happen. And then you also see certain industries that COVID-19, and even just the last 2 years in general, they've just like grown, and they can't keep up with the growth.
Exactly.
And they have to hire more people because they may not have enough family members that want to be involved with the business. They're going outside, and who's going to fit this culture that we've built up within our company? Who's going to help us get it to where we need it to go? And then, do we have the money to buy this software, and do we have the time to implement it? Because we're so busy right now. And there was a client a couple years, well, I guess it started in 2020, the beginning of it. They came in, they're doing about $4 million a year, and when 2020 really started going and we got shut down about March, then they moved to doing 4 million a month. And
Oh my
keeping up
gosh.
with that amount of change is crazy. And they're like, we got to hire people. I don't have certain people that can cross hats, that their expertise is only here. It can't go here. Where do I find people, and kind of help and walk them through that process. And it was really cool to see. And then you see people on the other side of it. We had a client that did an implementation during 2020, and they're family owned business. And going back to what you said about just motivation, they had so much motivation to get this implemented and get it up and running because they needed to be able to keep up with demand also, that they were able to get it done under what the vendor had even said, the amount of time, and way under budget, because they were so focused on keeping it their number one priority.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
great. That's a really impressive thing to do. Just showcases again the overall just drive behind a business that is a huge piece of your identity as a person. And we say that even people that don't work at family businesses, they can eat, sleep, and breathe an industry. I wanted to ask you, when we had this conversation, is there any specific software that is better for a family run business than another?
I think what would determine it is what industry are you in? There's certain industries that, hey, maybe you're really good at distribution. There's certain softwares that their specialties distribution. There's other ones that manufacturing is really where their strong point is. So even if we're talking about the big ERPs like NetSuite and N4, IFS, all of those, you look at like an N4 and IFS, QAD, handful of those. Manufacturing is something they're really, really good at, where NetSuite is good at it, but you would look at those and be like, yes, I would start wanting to narrow it down to this specialty. NetSuite is really good for e-commerce stuff. Microsoft is great for e-commerce. And so you may lean a little bit more that way if you're looking to connect those. And then there's a handful of other softwares, all in, but I know people can resonate with some of the big names.
And if you were to give one piece of advice for a family-owned business that's really trying to grow, what would that be?
Gosh, how would
you can pick two pieces.
Okay, I was like, I may have to pick two.
I'll permit it.
Okay.
Just once though.
I think that if you're ready to really grow, is having a strategy in what is that growth going to look like. I think small businesses and family business in general, they can get hung up on, well, we've always done it this way. It's been very, very successful for us. Why would we want to change to be able to scale? Mm-hmm. And not letting that stop you from getting to where you need to go. That may mean, hey, we need to bring in a non-family member for a board of directors. We may need to hire an outsider that has a different lens to see what we need to do, because at the end of the day, some family member or even who's running the company may not have that skill set to get it to where it needs to go, and you may have to rely on somebody else to help you get there. And then the last one I always say is every family business needs to have an exit strategy. And whether that's you're selling it, whether you're handing it off, you're merging, whatever that looks like, because that helps you scale. You know that, hey, our exit strategy is maybe we get to 50 million and we're going to sell it, and you're at 30 million today. You get some parameters, or you have a number in mind that, hey, if somebody approaches me, yep, this is the number I would sell it at. And they're just good things to have in mind, because you may not be able to keep your company forever. You may get tired of it. The next generation may not want to come in and take it over. And it's just good planning.
Absolutely. That makes a ton of sense. Well, if you'd like to learn more about our small business capabilities here at Third Stage, please feel free to reach out to me or Kristy directly, which I'll put her contact information in the description. Thank you so much for being here today, Kristy. We always love to have you on. You always have such great insight. So we appreciate your time and sharing with us today.
Thanks.
just a reminder to all of our listeners, we do have new interviews every Wednesday and our shorter form podcast on Mondays and Fridays. Also, please check out our sister podcast, Transformation Ground Control, which is our larger form and longer form podcast that comes out every Wednesday on both YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. So please subscribe so you don't miss those, and we will see you next time on Digital Stratosphere.